The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by DraftKings. Intro to DraftKings NBA. How do you play it? How do you win at doing? Which tournaments should you select? This is all going to be covered today. I myself am not a huge NBA DraftKings player. I more live on the golf and the football side of things, but I like to dabble every now and then. I always say that I'm going to get really into basketball every single year, and then I forget because it starts when I start to get into it, it's around Christmas time, and then I just completely forget. But I want to do it this year. We got some great tools and advice for you. So if you go to ftndaily.com right now, use code Mayo, you can get all of the tools you'll see showcased in this show, and all of the live streams, the advice, everything that you need to know to get yourself ready with all those last minute changes going on in the NBA to get yourself ahead. So ftndaily.com, you can find the link in the description. Plus, use code Mayo and get yourself a discount off of that if you're serious about playing DraftKings NBA this year. If you're not serious, then I suggest you don't get it. But if you do actually want to win, this is probably the route that you want to take. Joining me from FTNDaily.com, first up, the man who's doing a ton of live streams and a ton of work over there, Fast Eddie Fear. What's going on, my man?
How you doing, St. Patrick?
Listen, I'm doing well. I like that I'm talking to you. You're going to inform me and the peoples of what I should be doing here.
I shall do my very, very best.
All right, and also from FTNDaily.com, Stefano Vaccarino, what is happening, man?
What's up, Pat? Thanks for having me on. I'm kind of fanboying here a little bit. I'm a big fan of the show, and I'm honored to be on it. I'm excited to talk some basketball.
Well, people can follow you on Twitter at Big Money Play. People know about Eddie. They can go follow Fast Eddie Fear, but Big Money Play on Twitter for Stefano, and I see Eddie got in my head about how to pronounce your name. I had it right. Eddie's like, no, I pronounce it incorrectly. Now it's all just living up here. Anyway, here's where I want to start. Let's pretend Pat Mayo knows, I don't want to say nothing about the NBA. I know a base level about the NBA. I'm not a hardcore when it comes to hoops. So, Eddie, first thing I do, I click on NBA on DraftKings. I'm searching tournaments. I click on hey, here's a tournament I want to play. What should I be looking for? I can't just play James Harden in every spot. So am I looking for minutes played from these scrub guys? How do I go about constructing a lineup just on a very basic level?
It's going to be tough for me to answer that question in under a half hour because this cues me up for my number one basketball talking point. But you alluded to obviously a critical point in it, which is to say that minutes are king. What distinguishes basketball the most from all the other sports, and the reason I focus on it solely, is it is not unique, but very, very far to one end of a statistical spectrum that exists across all daily fantasy sports. And that spectrum is how predictable something is. Basketball is phenomenally predictable relative to golf or football or really anything the heck else. If you look at football or baseball, there is the potential to score a massive number of points all at once with a home run or a 50-yard touchdown or something like that. So the ability to project things within a narrow range on any given day is really difficult. You'll see that if you look at results over the course of a year for Mike Trout or for, Julio Jones or for any other big name player in those sports. But for basketball, because A, there are so many more scoring instances, and B, because they are for relatively small values, it's an immensely predictable sport. Mike Trout gets 5 chances to score on a day. LeBron James gets 100. He gets 25 chances to grab a rebound. He'll grab 10 or 15 of those. He gets 20 chances to get an assist. He gets 10 of those. He takes 15, 20, 25 shots. And all these things come up with a much narrower statistical profile. And again, I'm sort of the anti-Stefano in this way, because Stefano is remarkably good at creating tools, great tools, next generation tools that go beyond the kind of data that in basketball has become remarkably commonplace because it is so incredibly predictable. And basically the two merits you're looking at there is everyone has a rate of fantasy points they tend to get, and we have massive sample sizes over days, months, and years. And you multiply that by the amount of minutes they're supposed to play. And if you look at 20 people's projections, just this is how many points I think Guy scores today. It tends to be a really homogeneous number because it is a very, very predictable sport. So you got it sort of right on the nose that you want to play guys who are going to play.
So this becomes a big problem, Stefano, because I'm not really paying attention necessarily all day long to the different rotations, or at least know what the different rotations are going to be. So if someone gets yanked last minute and we find that out at, let's say, 6:48 p.m. Eastern time, how much can that affect the lineups that you're playing?
I mean, it affects everything, right? You can't play NBA DFS well if you're not going to be around from that, at least that final hour from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, approaching lock. I would recommend you're available up until the last game starts, because you never know what news might break for that West Coast, game. But, that's when you have the opportunity to leverage ownership. So if someone gets scratched, let's say at noon, and the backup center, who is a high fantasy point per minute producer, is at minimum price, everyone's going to play that player. And there's times where you have to, decide, is this player worth the ownership he's going to have? You want to be over the field or under the field? And this is something Eddie talks to on his stream all the time that he's so good at, is projecting what a person's ownership would be and whether it is worth that ownership to be even with it, under it, or over it. And so the later the news breaks, the less likely people are going to adjust to that ownership. So if you get LeBron James is scratched at 6:57 p.m. Eastern, and he's playing an East Coast 7 p.m. game, you're going to have a lot of dead lineups. So you just always have to be around, for that last minute news in order to adjust appropriately. And if you're not, I would recommend just not playing NBA DFS that day, because there's a good chance you're not going to win and you're not going to be able to adjust accordingly.
Yeah, it's essentially like not paying attention from 11:35 a.m. to lock on NFL Sunday.
It's actually much worse than that. Because the percentage of players who are expected to play in football is massively higher than it is in basketball. It touches on two of the things that are most important to playing NBA DFS, one of which is being vigilant and keeping track of news and information, as you guys alluded to. But the second is also taking advantage of the times you are actually opportuned. People miss all the time in basketball, much more frequently than they do in football, and it happens a couple times a week. And being able to correctly implement that information, make the appropriate changes, and also another key for me is increase your action as much as possible, is basically the key to playing NBA DFS. I've gone on record and I'm pretty convinced this is the case because of how statistically predictable it is. No one in the world over a long time frame would ever beat NBA DFS without shit getting weird. But shit getting weird provides a massive opportunity. A guy goes out at 6:55. We had a few days ago, there was a Pacers showdown slate where Miles Turner, is the starting center for the Pacers, got scratched 10 minutes before lock, and that was preseason. And we went, everyone get in there because people screwed up. And Miles Turner was 33% owned, I think. So instead of there being a 15% rake and every dollar I put in giving 85 cents back to the field in prizes, every dollar I put in gave back $1.22. So one of the most critical things for me in all DFS, but specifically in basketball, is the ability to quickly implement changes into your lineups. Have people who are listening and informed and can give you quick advice on the other end of whatever line you're watching, and be able to push more chips into the middle of the table. For basketball, that is probably the most important thing. And it's largely eschewed by a lot of other shows and places I don't see talking about it a lot. And it's the cornerstone of almost any other form of adversarial betting in casino, poker, life, sports, anything, is that when you are advantaged, you should get more chips in the middle of the table. So much like in poker, you're going to fold a lot and wait to get the advantage. DFS, if crap never went weird, I don't think anyone would be reliably predictable over a long time. A 50% rake would break you all down. But there are 2, 5, 7, 12 times a year where we get news at 6:55 and I go, everyone's going to make money. Put all your chips in the middle of the table. And if you were betting $100 a day, you should make that 1,000, because that day is going to pay off the rest of your year, very possibly. And so that's sort of what we do. It's almost a letdown 9 days out of 10, but that 10th day where you get some actionable information with a few seconds left, you can have everyone in the chat make money. Like there are days literally where 100% of the people watching the show cash because they're just paying attention, and the rate goes from being 15% to negative 55% because some massively owned guy goes out and people simply don't react in time.
If you're watching the show right now, remember to smash the like button out there. And in the comment section, if you do play NBA DraftKings, give me your best tip for the season. People can go look at those. Stefano, any hit on it that you want to be paying attention, you want to be watching the live stream, you want to get that actionable advice right away so you know when to pounce, at ftndaily.com. Code Mayo for that discount. It seems like the NBA package is probably the most valuable package that you could actually have because of the people either in Slack or doing the live streams and updating the projections and the ownership projections and giving this real-time advice when it matters the most. That compared to football, I guess baseball could be close, although you have lineups out, or even golf where, you do something on Tuesday, it's good till Thursday morning. Like, this is real actionable stuff. So what does FTNDaily.com have in store for basketball season?
So we are essentially a one-stop shop. We have it all, and I know that's a really broad and general answer, but we have advanced tools, from Advanced DvP and splits, what we'll kind of get into, to standard pace tools and player stats and fantasy points per minute. We have live tracking of games, so you can follow along, how the games are going and see how your team is doing. And then we have really actionable content where we go from cash game articles. We have 2 live streams, one preceding Eddie's live stream that is right before lock, where I'll be with Kyle Murray breaking down the slate from more of an analytical standpoint, going game by game, saying, okay, these are the best matchups. And that will lead right into Eddie's stream where he breaks down the news and tells you, okay, this is a leverageable spot, or, maybe this isn't the greatest slate, don't go all in, or, oh, LeBron James just got scratched, let's push the chips in the middle of the table. We have projections from Kyle Murray. We've got ownership projections from Kyle Murray, and those ownership projections are massive, and that's where you really get your edge. If we identify bad chalk for you using Kyle's ownership and then Eddie's stream or other tools that we have, there's a real chance of a major leverage over the field of a player who might be 50+% owned, and you come in at 15% if you're playing multiple lineups. So we really have everything you want, from written content, audio, video, premium tools, projections, ownership projections. What you need, we have the ability to provide you a winning experience.
Eddie, you're doing this stuff all day. You're trying to think about how the lineups are going to go, and then you're trying to react to it. How difficult is it to say, hey, I've built my lineups, let's say at 5 o'clock, and that's when I have the basis of what I want to do. And then you get hit with this reaction at 6:51 p.m. Eastern. You're doing a live stream. How do you change your lineups?
I don't have any lineups.
Oh.
That's the only reason I host shows or do this at all, is I'm not legally allowed to play. I'm a vice president at a company that publishes DFS contests throughout Europe and Asia. And I just got off a call with the Ukraine, and my next one is with South Africa. So after Ethan Gate in 2015, both FanDuel and DraftKings told me to keep my business at home. So just like one of the employees of those businesses, I'm not allowed to play. And not long after that, one of the OGs of the daily fantasy business, Emac, said, hey, do you want to come on my show? And then we sort of took off like a rocket ship from there. And it's been all dairy since then. But I haven't been able to legally enter a DFS contest in a good 5 years and a couple months. And thank you for bringing up such a painful memory.
Well, I'm sorry about that, but it does speak to the fact that you're still giving out the advice on it. So obviously,
not
even that.
I would not try to do both. Like
exactly.
I've seen, there's been a number of times, and I would not try to do both. I was running thousands of dollars on up to 7 or 8 sites when this happened. This is back in late days of the DFS boom, but there was just an incredible number of sites with, it was the heady days of early DFS where there was just so much overlay where there was functionally no rake. Basically, if you balanced out overlay and give backs and rake backs and promotions, you were basically playing rake free. It was pretty glorious. It was really, really hard to lose back at that time. But I would never try to do it concurrently with actually hosting a show. And I never hosted a show until I was able to. And if I changed to day jobs, I very possibly might go back and play again. But I wouldn't host then. And there are real times it's marketable. Like I don't want to call anyone out, but there have been major events in the last year where something went squirrely with 2 minutes before lock. And I went, okay, everyone, here's what we're going to do. Do this, do this, do this. Take this guy out, put this guy in, put everyone else in the late game so you can womp to them, and then put as much money as you can in the middle of the table, while hosts on other shows are going, oh, crap. and no one's talking because they each have 150 or more lineups, and they're trying to repair their stuff. And I'm completely sympathetic for that. But a big part of my job is not being otherwise inhibited and doing other things for that last hour or two leading up to log.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's the same reason why I don't go an hour and a half live before NFL lock or PGA lock, because I go earlier in the morning. I give out what I have to say, and then if something changes, I want to be able to change my stuff too. Like you talk about, I want to be sitting there just on the computer the entire time, just trying to change my lineups and not being able to do anything. Stefano, different for you. You're playing lineups. So what happens at 6:55? Someone gets yanked. What do you do with your lineups?
I mean, honestly, I let Eddie talk a little bit and look at my lineups and make a few edits. But the first thing I would do is, so you see the news. Luckily, I follow NBA so closely. I know kind of off the top of my head who is directly impacted from that news, so I'm able to make a quick decision. But if I had to look, I would look at what is his replacement fantasy points per minute. How many minutes do I expect him to project? What is a usage difference for his teammates? Because a lot of people think, okay, let's say LeBron James is out, Anthony Davis is playing, but people might not realize LeBron James being out has probably a bigger impact on Anthony Davis than it does LeBron James' replacement, right? And so you want to know, how are LeBron's teammates impacted by an absence? And so we have the tools to provide that, and we'll get to that with the splits tool. But quite frankly, you kind of have to, if it's a last minute 6:57 p.m. news, you kind of have to take a stand and either say, okay, I'm adjusting with this player. I mean, the first thing you have to do is remove the player who's not going to get any fantasy points. And then you have to see who impacts it and try and, mix and match your exposures to where you're happy, where you think you can profit off that news.
Eddie, how do you navigate the different size slates? So if it's like a 2-game slate or a 6-game slate, or maybe there's an imbalance between early games and late games or vice versa, does that affect how, obviously the player pool is going to be bigger, but does that dictate to say, hey, I don't need to take as big of a chance on a 6-game slate versus a 2-game slate, or I want to stack some early games and maybe I can do something and see where I'm at after, whenever that might come up? Or does it dictate how people should be playing cash games versus GPPs, like a larger slate, GPPs, a smaller slate, cash games? Is there any rhyme or reason to this, or does it depend on the slate itself and the teams that are up?
Well, it depends on the slate, the teams, the time of year, and the individual involved. And by that, I mean the player. But DFS is pretty easy during the preseason because you can play it closer to your belly. It's not as rich as it was a couple years ago, but it's still very, very profitable because enough people screw up, and it requires a ton of work, and other people are invested in football and other things. So there's not quite as much public information out there. So it's one of those times you can kind of just play the good plays and again, play it pretty close to your chest. And it tends to be pretty popular. People will screw up and give you their money, especially on slates like tonight. We have, there's 8 games tonight, 7 of which are on the main slate. Most of them are late. The last game's an hour and a half after the other ones. If you pay attention the whole night, people will make enough mistakes that if you just play decent plays the whole night, you're probably going to get there. So preseason is very different from early season, where again there are more fish in the pond, for lack of a better analogy, and it's just an easier pool. Whereas if you go 4 or 5 months into a season, it has gotten where there's really no easy meat on the bone, and so all those affect things. And then there's just the personal tolerance for risk. Some people don't want to lose 3 days out of 4, which every GPP player will. Period. No matter how good you are, you're going to lose more days than you win if you play GPPs mostly. Maybe not if you're playing max entries and you get enough entries in there that some will balance out with others, but you're going to lose many days if you play GPPs, but some days you'll get paid off 50-1. If you play cash, you're going to win hopefully about half the time, maybe a little bit more to make yourself profitable, but it's got a lot to do with your tolerance and matching that with your desire as a player. And so that's one of the tough things about running the show, is you're trying to customize it to speak to as many people as possible. But there's some people who are too withdrawn and just playing it too straight, especially for a sport like basketball that for most of the year projections and data are only going to take you so far. And then there's other people who are too crazy and need to be drawn in a little bit. And so you have to find a way to get your contest to match your style. But definitely 2 games versus 6 games ends up being incredibly different. And a lot of it has to do with risk tolerance and what kind of player you want to be. There are ways to be a profitable player playing cash and playing tournaments. And most people, after trying both for a while, which is what I really recommend for people starting, will choose, oh, I like this more. And then you can start to refine your process towards what suits you best.
Stefano, what is the noticeable difference between building a GPP and a cash lineup for NBA? Because I think about something like golf, and no one is safe in golf. Guys miss the cut all the time. The best player in the world can miss the cut, and then you're screwed. I guess you could put in a baseline of projections and give yourself a cut probability made percentage, but I find that versus football is easier to build a cash game lineup for. Play the best plays, even if they're chalky. It doesn't really matter. You can kind of get there if your projections are right. In the NBA, how does that work? Because it does seem like if guys are going to get late scratch most nights, and that opens up value somewhere that people don't necessarily see, is playing stars and scrubs just the way to go?
I mean, it's all about ownership, right? So in cash, you don't have to worry about ownership too much, where you can just kind of play the best plays, sort of what Eddie alluded to, where, all right, this player is going to see increased minutes. He's at minimum price. I don't care if he's going to be 80 or 90% owned in cash. I'm just going to play him in cash. In GPPs, you have to really you have to really think and gauge whether this person's ownership is worth it. Because let's say you have someone who is 60% owned in the major GPP and he flops and you have 10%, you have massive leverage over the field. And that's how you have the ability to potentially hit big, right? And Eddie talks about, if you're playing GPPs, you're probably going to lose 3 out of 4 times. And that was like the biggest thing for me to grasp, right? I originally started playing just cash and single entries, and I moved into more of a GPP player, and understanding that you're going to lose, right? And that's okay. You want to maximize your winning days. So if you lose 3 out of 4 days and then you win for 10K that 4th day, you're profitable. It's okay that you lost the first 3 days. So understanding, what your goals are, if you're playing multiple lineups and you're fine to play in the big contests and GPPs, if you're only playing one lineup, I would stick to single entry. But in terms of cash versus GPPs, it's about, risk. And in GPPs, you have to take bigger risks. You can't just play the best plays because you're never going to get that big hit. In cash, you can kind of go with the flow with ownership and, play someone who is 80, 90% owning cash and just move on with it.
Eddie, what do you find are the biggest mistakes that people make when they first go in? Is it bankroll management and the improper allocation of which tournaments to select? Is it not taking the sort of risk that Stefano's talking about in GPPs where you're gonna lose? You need to come to terms with that if you're actually going to win big at any point. Like, what is the learning curve for this stuff that you see that people are like, man, like just you got to stop doing that, and then all of a sudden, you'll at least increase your ROI just a little bit.
It's a little bit vague, but for me, it's treating basketball like it's any other sport. It's not. It's all the way on this line of the sports. And if this is average, all the way at this end is the massively statistically predictable basketball. And I know a lot of people who play all the sports and are profitable at all of them. People whose name, if I dropped, you would know. People who make millions of dollars in some sports who constantly lose money at basketball because they treat it the same way. And it's just not the same sport. There are people who are like, I'm going to beat basketball with my better projections, which in something like baseball or football, there's still meat on the bone to win there. If you have extra insight or understanding that this guy is more likely to score a touchdown, and you understand why that's going to happen because this guy is going to get doubled, and that knowledge is A, incredibly valuable because you're talking about big extra chunks of points, and B, relatively scarce. In basketball, no individual bit of information, or very rarely, is something that valuable, and everyone knows everything. So just being out there and being like, I'm going to win at NBA DFS because my projections are better is a facile idea. It's mathematically ridiculous to suggest that you could do that. There's just no meat on that bone. The analogy I frequently draw is that projections, actual just basic data, this is how many fantasy points I think this guy is going to score in fantasy basketball, are analogous to sneakers in actual basketball. They're necessary. You can't play without projections. You want them. We have a great set of projections, but much like basketball, real basketball and sneakers, they're never going to win you anything. Basically, everyone's got sneakers at this point. If you ran into a guy out there on the court playing in loafers, yes, you will dust his ass because you have sneakers and he doesn't. But it's much like that, where people will treat it like it's another sport and think like, I'm going to get these great projections and these are going to cause me to win. That's insane. It's ridiculous. It's obviously false on its face.
So, Stefano, what do you see the mistakes that people make? Because you're chatting a lot with people in Slack and you're talking to the subs all the time. Do they come to you and be like, hey, I tried this didn't work? And you're like, oh, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I think it's understanding what your goal is, right? Are you chasing the big hit, or are you just looking to make a little money, or are you just looking to have fun? If someone's starting out with like a minimal bankroll, let's say they're playing $100 a night, right? Instead of playing one lineup at $100 a night, and this is granted if they have the time to do this, but instead of playing one lineup at $100 a night, I would recommend, playing some 20 maxes and maxing a 20 max on DraftKings and playing 20 different lineups and figuring out, how you leverage exposures and ownership, and you're kind of you're boosting your odds, right? Because you're playing more than one lineup. So if one person, flops, he doesn't kill your night. And so if you're not playing big money, I would either recommend sticking to cash, single entry, or just playing multiple lineups at that same, kind of price point and trying, mix and match to see what works for you. And at the end of the day, one thing that someone suggests to you might not exactly work for you. Where it's something that, let's say you just want to play cash and you're doubling up 60% of the time, you just stick with cash, and it's okay, doubling your money 60% of the time, right? You're a profitable player. So it depends on what your goal is as a DFS player.
Eddie, if we are looking to construct lineups and find cheap players to put in, is there a position that lends itself better to a cheap price, or is it always just opportunity? Like, is a $4,000 center, and let's say you had a $4,000 center open up and a $4,000 guard open up. Do you take the guard or the center, or is it just whoever actually is in that best opportunity?
Yeah, it's probably the one that has the least opportunity cost. Frequently on DraftKings specifically, that center spot is more valuable to you. There's a goodly number of players who are just center, and you can play them in just your center and your utility spot. And frequently you're going to want that for strong producers. We had that last night and the night before, honestly. So in a vacuum, more often than not, everything else being equal, you would probably go with the guard, leaving yourself that utility or center free, which tends to be more valuable. But it's always the opportunity cost of that particular slate. There will be days that it's like, wow, there are many days I can remember, wow, I really want to play 4 point guards. And you can't unless one of them has shooting guard eligibility. You can't play 4 straight point guards, but you can play 3, but you can never play 3 straight centers. So just by process of elimination and the nuances of the particular 8-person roster construction at DK, more often than not, you'll fall to the center, which also for a value play tends to be a little safer. Just as, again, nuances of basketball, you tend to have sort of a floor from rebounds if you're playing center, you're some sort of big, so it's a little harder to fall completely on your face. But again, that's going to come down to the individual players. But more often than not, you'll go with the big, I think.
So, Stefano, over at FTNDaily.com, once again, if you want to get access to the information, all of the premium tools, code Mayo gets you a discount. What are you guys cooking up for the premium tools this year, and how should people use them?
So we have Advanced DvP and our splits tool. And so I'll start with Advanced DvP, which is essentially their quantified player traits, right? And, to understand that, you have to understand what defense versus position is. And that's the more commonly used stat that I personally think is dated and is arguably irrelevant. I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's close to irrelevant.
I think irrelevant is too kind.
It's too kind?
I think irrelevant is too kind. I think it is openly distortive. I think if you're telling me this is my process and I can add DVP, standard DVP to it or not, I would do better adding nothing than using DVP as part of my process. I think it's openly distorted. DVP is defense versus position. Yep. So that's where you're like, this team is bad against shooting guards. Or so, and that's just not how basketball works at all anymore. And who they label as shooting guard is incredibly arbitrary. And so yes, I think it's actually worse than not necessarily helping you. Like, that might have been too generous.
No, yeah, and you mentioned shooting guard, and that's the example I always use. Like, why should James Harden and JJ Redick be classified as the same person? Why should they be treated equally? They're completely different players, but DVP treats them as the same. Advanced DVP, we break it down by player traits, and basically we quantify those traits where these players have to fit a certain threshold to qualify, and players can, qualify for multiple traits. You can combine traits, and I'll share my screen now and kind of give a little preview of the Advanced DvP tool. So yeah, now we're looking at Advanced DvP. This is our tool. And so here are all of our player traits. We've got dimer, primary ball handler, scorer, shooter, 3-and-D, low usage wing, crafty finisher, point forward, stretch big, rebounder, rim protector, skilled center, bench, and superstar. And if you're curious of like for what, how someone may qualify for this trait, we give examples if you click this I button right by advanced. And a dimer sounds exactly what it is. And this is kind of used, this is kind of taken from how NBA 2K used the word dimer, where they're a pass first point guard. So someone like Chris Paul usually will qualify as a dimer. Same with LeBron James.
LaMelo.
And who?
LaMelo.
And LaMelo, yeah.
I'm still high on LaMelo Ball. He's looking good. That's all.
And so, we have dimer, and this is just looking at it a very basic way, right? So we're only selecting one trait. And so we see the Portland Trailblazers were the best matchup against pass first point guards this past year. Surprisingly, the Utah Jazz show second, right? And this is some of the power that Advanced DvP has, right? So the Utah Jazz, when looking at DvP, which is the number that you see next to someone's DraftKings name, that's either red or green, the Jazz are always known as a elite defense that, they don't give up a lot of fantasy points. They're not a team you want to attack. What Advanced DvP does is allows us to find opportunities where the public might think this is a really bad matchup, but it could be a good matchup for this one individual player with this specific trait. And now what the Jazz do is they kind of sag on the pick and roll. And, Rudy Gobert, as good of a defender as he is, he allows point guards to either take a kind of fairly open mid-range jumper, or he'll overplay the pick and roll, which will leave the center open to score. And so it's fun seeing, Advanced DvP kind of match the eye test, because when you watch the Jazz, you notice Gobert kind of overplaying it, and the data kind of backs up the eye test. So one thing Advanced DvP also does that's really important is it combines traits, right? So people who are primary ball handlers and scorers, this might be someone like James Harden, for example. We see what their matchup is. And this isn't just limited to shooting guards. It also is limited to power forwards, centers. Someone like Nikola Jokic qualifies as a primary ball handler, as he rightfully should, because he's technically the Nuggets point guard if you have to put a label on it. An interesting kind of test case here is you combine primary ball handler, scorer, and bench. And we see, the Celtics are a team, again, that people don't really want to attack, I should say, in DFS, because they are typically a slower paced team that's a really good team defense. You look at their second unit, and it makes sense that, their second unit doesn't have the defenders that their starting lineup has. And so, bench scorers, someone like Lou Williams or Jordan Clarkson have typically done well against the Celtics. And, on a specific slate where maybe the Celtics are playing the Utah Jazz, having a little exposure to someone like Jordan Clarkson last year probably paid off, because the Celtics were a bad team in this sort of aspect. So where I like to use the tool the most, this is kind of a broad overview and a chart of all the teams and what their average is against this specific trait or traits. But you scroll down, you can get to player matchups, and this is where it's really, really useful. And we see a player and all his traits. Giannis, of course, leads Advanced DvP in traits with 9, as he should be. This is a good test case. I would have been worried if Giannis only had one trait. I would have said maybe our algorithm's a little off. But so you see the player's traits. Giannis qualifies as a dimer, a primary ball handler, a scorer, a crafty finisher, point forward, stretch big, skilled center, rebounder, superstar. And quite frankly, someone like Giannis, Advanced DvP isn't the most useful tool, just because he's kind of matchup proof. He does it, and he's Giannis, right? But if you are kind of in a tough 1v1 in superstars, right? You're thinking about Giannis or LeBron James. You just add LeBron James to matchup 2. And let's say LeBron is playing the Utah Jazz. So, we see LeBron's traits versus Giannis's traits. And, you kind of make the decision on your own. Okay, do I think LeBron is in a better matchup and money well spent compared to Giannis? Is Giannis going to be 40% owned and LeBron only 10% owned, but LeBron maybe sneakily has the better matchup, and that's some leverage you can have on the field? So those are like some kind of fairly basic ways to use Advanced DvP, and why it's a powerful tool, because it limits, it gives you an edge on what the public is actually looking at. And a lot of people are looking at defense first position, particularly just because it's on the DraftKings homepage and it shows right next to a player's name when someone's building a lineup.
So Eddie, when you spoke about how like this tool is so much better than just having the defense versus position, and you were talking a little bit earlier about how, projections are one thing, everyone has projections. Is adding projections, looking through the projections and doing a 1v1 or a 2v2 in terms of price comparison, ownership comparison with a tool like this is what you're talking about to get that extra edge?
Yeah, this is metadata, we'll call it for a second, or metagaming, as we say in game design. It's not just the basic rules of the thing, which is how many points do I think these people are going to score. It's taking it an extra level and talking about things like ownership, which is remarkably critical and incredibly important for being successful, and next level tools. And we have stuff like this all the time. And this tool encapsulates so much of what I try to talk about. It's really probably my favorite tool that I've ever seen on a site dealing with basketball, and I've seen 100. One of the it's all about sort of going an extra level with. So there was a sort of a meme in the DFS area of Twitter a couple of weeks ago where someone started a thread that was something like, if they wrote down the top 5 players in any sport that cost you the most money in DFS, who would they be? And the name I saw the most was PJ Tucker, because people don't know how to play PJ Tucker. And it's always been amazing to me. PJ Tucker, one of my favorite players, love the way that man plays D. But as far as a DFS asset, basically isn't incredibly good at creating his own shot, but still 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year, James Harden and/or his number one runner with, whether it be Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook, is out, and people go, oh, one of those guys are out, I'm going to get more PJ Tucker. So PJ Tucker goes from being 4% owned, which is what he's owned on any given Wednesday, to 40% owned, and he's actively worse. PJ Tucker can't create his own shot. So when you have Russell Westbrook and James Harden crashing it at 1,000,000 miles an hour, PJ Tucker gets the only way he really gets his offensive game going, which is he makes corner threes. He's very good at making corner threes, but he's not that quick, so he doesn't get that open that often, except if you have James Harden and Russell Westbrook and they're flying around like a pack of bees. So when they're out, he actually takes like one fewer three-pointer a game and makes fewer and scores less fantasy points. But the guy's ownership goes from 4% to 40%. So yes, people keep playing him when he's actively worse and own 10 times as much. And then they're like, yeah, that guy keeps screwing me. And it's like, no, you're not. It's not as simple as this guy is out, I'm going to play other guys on the team, they're going to go off now. So I love that this tool, unlike many, is nuanced. It's not like DVP, which is the opposite of nuanced. It's taking a very, very round thing and trying to pound it into a square hole. This is really going an extra level and giving you some very refined, subtle data. So I'm a big fan of this tool.
So, and not to kill DVP, sorry, Pat, I don't mean to interrupt. I was just saying not to kill DVP completely. What DVP does one thing really well is that it's incredibly simple, right? It says, okay, this is a number, this is a matchup, this is a good number, you should do it. Now, whether that number is correct or not, that's a different argument. So we try and replicate what DVP does, right, and making it super simple. And while this tool is complicated on the back end, it's incredibly simple and easy to use and easy to understand, and helps you truly find what the best matchup of the slate is.
So what other tools are we running out at ftndaily.com? So we have the Advanced DvP. Obviously, there are projections. There are ownership projections. Is there anything else you want to show off?
Yeah, so we have our splits tool right here. And NBA splits essentially is, how does player X do when players or player XY are off the court? And how is the team impacted when a player is off the court? We touched on in the beginning of the show how impactful news is. This is how we measure how impactful that news is. So in our splits tool, we have both team impacts and player impacts on the same page. We'll start on the team impact.
Do me a PJ Tucker while you're at it. I'm kind of curious. If I put my spoon out there, I'm curious, should my experiential watching 100 hours of basketball take match? But if you put PJ Tucker on there and then put like Harden and Westbrook in and then give me Harden and Westbrook out, I'm pretty sure he's actually worse when they're out, and his ownership gets multiplied by some massive factor. So can you do that one? No, this is on the spot. If this doesn't come out the way I expect, I'm gonna look really dumb, but we'll give it a try.
Yeah, so we'll switch. We'll start with the player. So we'll do Harden. Do you want Harden and Westbrook off, or just one and one?
Let's start with Westbrook, where I expect it to be more pronounced, because he's literally just crashing all day, and his three-pointer is broke. So it's pretty nominal with Harden, I think. I'd expect it to be almost even. Westbrook should be more demonstrably a positive for like PJ Tucker. I believe should want him in there.
And so the way to do that, first off, is you select your team, right? We're on player impact. We want PJ Tucker on the Rockets. You select PJ Tucker, and we can select our player to remove. We can select as many players we want to remove. We're just selecting Westbrook for now, and click fetch, and it will give you all the data you need. And there we go. To Eddie's credit, right? With when in games, that Russell Westbrook has played 0 minutes. This is not just when he's off the court. This is when games where Russell Westbrook has not played at all.
Okay.
PJ Tucker actually averages less fantasy points than when.
Yeah, look at that. His usage even goes up a little bit, which would make sense because there's left foot over there. But look, he takes a third less of a 3-pointer. He makes 40% less of a 3-pointer, and that's the only way the guy scores points. I mean, you hope to get the double-double with him, couple steals, couple blocks, but he's actively worse. See, there it is, right there.
His effective field goal percentage and true shooting goes down. His minutes don't really go up at all. They're unaffected. And let's try it with just Harden.
That's over 19 games. So it cracks me up that like 5 times a year I'm forced to go, Harden's out. Don't play PJ Tucker. He's just going to be unable to get open. It's not better for him, and he's going to be 10 times as much on. Play anybody but PJ Tucker. I have to do about once a month.
So you can toggle this to games they sit and just moments where they're off the court, right?
Yep, exactly. And that's what our splits tool is different from like the industries, right? And this tool is available on other sites, and it's a great tool anywhere. What I really wanted to add to ours that I haven't seen is the difference when someone plays 0 minutes, when they're actually not playing in the game, and when they're just off the court, and how you can use both to their kind of impact. For that, I'm going to switch to the Brooklyn Nets. Just checking this PJ Tucker versus James Harden kind of one right now. And yeah, there's really no positive impact when Harden sits for PJ Tucker.
He's very, very slightly, he's a little higher on FanDuel apparently, but it's almost no change. He scores less on DraftKings right there. So he goes down on DraftKings and his ownership goes up by a factor of like it's a real thing. A lot of red there.
Using the difference on how to use 0 minutes and off the court effectively, right? So this was a common occurrence last year where Kyrie Irving was out. How does it affect Karis LeVert, right? And so we just look at the basic, Karis LeVert in games Kyrie Irving has played 0 minutes, and we'll let that load up right now. And so we saw LeVert only really saw a 1.6 minute bump. His FanDuel points per game were up 5.65. His usage was up 1.8%. When looking at like just, I guess when making my first look, I prefer doing per minute over per game. Per game is great to see where the player's minutes bump come. And that's really important because that averages out and you can see, okay, this player you might think gets 18 minutes, but he actually only gets 4 minutes when this player doesn't play. But looking at it from a per minute perspective is the best way to do it because then you kind of project your own minutes. So we saw LeVert with just Kyrie in just games Kyrie didn't play, his DraftKings points per minute went from 1.13 to 1.25. And that's a fairly noticeable difference. His usage went up 1.84%. Now, we have Kyrie off the court. What is LeVert's kind of numbers when Kyrie and Spencer Dinwiddie are off the court? And this is important because LeVert isn't just going to play 48 minutes with Spencer Dinwiddie when Kyrie's not playing. He's going to play probably 5 to 8 minutes of the game, potentially even 10 plus minutes without Spencer Dinwiddie. And this is where LeVert's going to see his mega usage bump, right?
Yeah. And
that's kind of where you see the LeVert ceiling games where, you see Kyrie and Spencer off the floor. He gets a 0.26, I should say, DraftKings point per minute bump. His usage goes 9%, which is a massive, massive difference. And so you're getting Karis LeVert's getting the initial bump with just Kyrie Irving not playing, and he's getting let's say a 5 to 10 minute further bump once he's in the game with Spencer Dinwiddie out.
That's pretty.
What's amazing is like your true shooting is up, your effective field goal percentage is up. Usually when you take out talented players like that, you would expect some of the efficiency to drop off in the name of volume, but over a pretty good sample size of 327 minutes there, he was slightly more efficient with those guys out. That's the really impressive part for me at an eye glance.
So, Stefano, if you go back to the main tools screen and the content screen at ftndaily.com, when you're behind the subscription wall, and once again, ftndaily.com, you get the subscription, use code Mayo, you get a discount on it, which is just fantastic stuff. This is just mind-blowing to me. This is not what I thought I'd be doing, trying to get into NBA. It was like, okay, now I need to learn the rotations a little bit easier for myself. But what other stuff is behind there?
So we have our lineups page, that's important. This will show who's starting. Well, obviously it's not showing right now because it's in preseason. So I'll go to NBA news, but this is where we can track news, and this is let's say you can't be in our chat. I highly recommend being in our Discord chat because that's where you'll get up to date news to the second. But this is also up to date news to the second, and you can search. We see Chris Porzingis. We'll search LeBron James. Let's see if there's any news. And this will give you basically updates on how you want to build your lineups and what news might impact your lineups. We have our stats page, which basically just shows you all the basic stats you need to know. And these are free things. And I'm starting with the free things because I want to entice people to kind of get a taste. If they're on the fence, we have things that are actionable that they can use. And we'll go to DraftKings DFS.
So you can use this for both the free tools that you can use up at ftndaily.com, or you can use for season long and DFS. Yes,
exactly. And yeah, you can use them for both. And we have the NBA stats for season long and DFS. They're relevant for both, and you can tell you can use it how you want, right? These are fairly basic stats, but it's a stat hub and it's important, right? We'll also, it's not live right now, but we'll also have a free tool that will show fantasy point per minutes per game, which will kind of take a part of the premium splits tool that we just had and move it to the free side. And on the premium side, we have our exposures, our cheat sheets. And so this is going to be a different view than other people have because I am an admin on the site. But from a user's standpoint, they will have players exposed, like our team's exposures, right? So one of our guys who he actually hosts with Eddie on his stream right before lock, Kawhisenberg, he hit for 25K on the first day of preseason. His exposures to that hit were on this page. And so you can see, okay, he played, I'm just using LeBron James again as an example, 15% of LeBron James, he played 25% Andre Drummond. And so exactly what our experts are doing and what their exposures are. And this is updated all the time. We have our optimizer, our SaberSim optimizer. And I know you've had Kyle on before to explaining the NFL one. We have the same thing for NBA. And if you're looking to play multiple lineups or maybe 150, maybe 20, this is a tool that you need to have essentially. And I think they're actually doing updates on the tool right now with the season upcoming. Okay, there we go. Now it's loading. But yeah, I mean, if you're playing 150 lineups, it's a tall ask, I would say, to build 150 NBA lineups by hand, especially with all the late news coming. So you're going to need an optimizer. And we've got a very good one with SaberSim, and they include Kyle Murray's projections, which are critical. From other things we have from Kyle Murray, we have ownership and projections. And this is probably Eddie's, I'll say, second favorite after Advanced DvP. I want to pat myself on the back because he was so kind about Advanced DvP. But he's right where you need ownership projections for NBA. You need to figure out how do I leverage against the field, and Kyle Murray has them. We have our preseason projections from yesterday up. The ownership is not up right now for preseason, but on this page, this is where you get Kyle's ownership and his player projections. And so we had Luka projected for 52 yesterday. It was a little high, but Kyle's usually spot on, but that's not his fault. It's preseason, and Rick Carlisle didn't give Luka his full minutes. And that's from a tools perspective, that's kind of what we have. I don't want to leave out Eddie Fear's rankings. I'm not sure if these are showing yesterday's rankings, but these are very valuable. And I'll let you kind of talk about it, Eddie.
Oh, I just go through the slate and give everybody a 1 to 10 ranking in both cash and GPPs. Cash looking at cash contests and how solid they're going to be in GPPs, being what sort of ceiling they possess and what chance I think they have of getting to that upside. But I actually use DraftKings. And the other end, I know a lot of people use it for this, is it's also my player pool. And I update this. I think I did 14 updates yesterday. But this is, if you're playing 150 lineups, this is every player I would have at least one share of. So some people have automated and tracked that a number 7 means this and a number 4 means this, and they go through and figure out exactly how to translate that, and they can just sort of base their entries on this. So I update it constantly through the show, but that was that'd be what that there is.
And from a content perspective, I know we're talking about the tools right now, but I don't want to leave out our content. Again, we'll have 2 live streams. We'll have me and Kyle Murray leading up from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, right until the Alive with Fast Eddie Fear. I always mix up the names. I don't want to cause any drama again.
People get grumpy about the names. Be careful.
But Live with Fast Eddie Fear, which is the pre-lock show from 6 to 7 p.m., which will feature also Kawhi Eisenberg. Shout out him. He's a stud and he's excellent at what he does.
Yeah. He's actually a college basketball coach. I like to throw that out there. So he knows himself some X's and O's.
And if you're looking for some more free content, we're going to have a free morning kind of first look game by game breakdown written by both Joe Metz and Adam Pfeiffer. We'll have a cash core article. I'll do some tiers stuff because NBA tiers become more and more popular. And, it's a fun game. I highly recommend people, if they're worried about news and they can't check, from that 6:30 to 7 p.m. and you really want to play, I would recommend trying tiers out where it's less relevant on news. And it's a really good DraftKings game. I'm a big fan of it. And so we have a ton of everything. We want to be a one-stop shop, and we want you to be able to consume all of our content. And that kind of sums it up.
Last thing that I want to get to with this, and Eddie, I guess we'll go to you first on it. Is there anything that you can really take away from either player props or totals in these games, like people try to do in football or baseball with run totals and team totals? Or is the NBA so individualistic that you could have a team with a low total, but you want a player on that team because they have such a high usage rate?
Well, I think Vegas is smart. I give Vegas a lot of credit. So I think for both props and over-unders, those are very useful points of data. So correctly incorporate into your system or your projections or whatever you want to use it for. For me, the tough part of fantasy sports or daily fantasy sports has always been figuring out how to weigh the various pieces of data. Like there are 7 basketball games tonight, and to talk about each one, there are literally 75 pieces of data I can use. So which ones do I care about at all? And then how do I rank those? So I worry about over-unders because they're an overused tool sometimes where people are just like, this is the fastest game of the night, I'm going to play a lot. And there's a real difference between when one game has a 235 over-under and then there's 4 other games and they're all under 220. And then when there's the top game is a 235 over-under and the others are 233, 232, 231, in which it's largely negligible. So I worry because I frequently see that statistic misused and that people don't draw sort of that subtlety with the fastest game of the night and turning a nuanced discussion of the actual over-unders into an ordinal, 220, 221, 222, 231, and 235 are very useful data points. Reducing that to 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, not as useful, and I see that done a lot, so I'm always a little wary of that occurring. But player props I find to be very useful. They're obviously occasionally a beatable thing. I like using Vegas as a very relevant data point. They are right more often than almost any single person was. One of the reasons I liked DFS and was big into DFS, much more so than I was ever into sports betting, was I was convinced that I could beat that guy and that guy and that guy a lot easier than I could beat Vegas.
So, Stefano, how do you approach both the Vegas lines, player props, and try to incorporate that into your process, if at all? Is it like a starting point to say, like, oh, hey, like this game is 20 more points than everything else. Maybe I'll start with that game and see what I'm doing?
Yeah, definitely. So, the first thing I do when I open up the slate and I do my research is I look at the Vegas totals, right? And you want to see what game has the highest total because typically that game, if your game has a higher point total, there's going to be more fantasy points in it. And that leads to pace, right? And so if you're unsure what pace does, just look at Vegas totals, and that incorporates a team's pace and defensive rating already. So just meshing the stats, and you see, okay, this is probably the highest scoring game in this slate. And if it's not the highest scoring game, it's going to be played at a great pace, where there's going to be more rebounding, steals, opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I highly recommend looking at totals. My kind of process with player props is, I use our tools and leverage the news that we get to see if Vegas is right or wrong. And I do think it's really important to understand that, Vegas spends a lot of money to make sure these projections for their props and their odds are correct. And so they're usually pretty spot on, right? A lot of the time you find yourself, you're like, okay, I have over 27.5 points for LeBron James. He had 27 points. Whatever. I mean, they're usually spot on. So using them as an indicator to see, okay, Vegas likes this person. I think he's going to be 5% owned, and Kyle Murray has him at 7% owned, and Giannis projects similarly, according to Vegas, at 20% ownership, you can use those kind of player props to justify making a decision whether to be over owning a certain player, right? So it's just a baseline projection that you can use for your research.
Okay, once again, you have the content that is up there. You have all of the tools at ftndaily.com. So if you don't care what anyone has to say about the research that you do, ftndaily.com, these premium tools sound like they're for you. Use code MAYO to get yourself a discount on that. But if you want to use the tools and get the color on it and how to use them properly and really have someone explain to you what they're saying, Eddie, once again, when is your stream going to be live every day?
Today I'm on for 2 hours today. In the preseason, I basically cover both shows, so I'm doing a couple hours a day. So I'll be on 5 to 7 today. But most days you will find NBA basketball running off at about 7 p.m. Eastern, and I should be on from 6 to 7, about 6 days a week.
And Stefano, what can be expected from you behind this paywall every single day during the season?
I'll be on right before Eddie from 5 to 6 p.m. Well, with Kyle Murray, we're going to be breaking down the slate. Just again, from an analytical standpoint, I'll be breaking down like how I use the tools, what matchups I like with the tool. Kyle will be talking about ownership and his projections and how we got to that process. And we're going to go game by game, breaking down the slate, giving you a complete overview, an analytical overview, I should say, of what to come to help you make the best decision possible.
All right, that will do it. On the Pat Mayo Experience, once again, smash the like button to the episode in the comments section. Tell me your favorite NBA DraftKings tips that you have utilized to win some cash over the years. Other than that, subscribe to Mayo Media Network. Download the podcast, Pat Mayo Experience. Subscribe to that as well. Leave a rating and review if you enjoy it. And FTNDaily.com, code Mayo, to get yourself a discount on all of the content up there behind the wall right now. Good luck in the NBA this year. I know I'm going to need it, but less so luck now that I have these tools at my disposal. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm Pat Mayo. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!